Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and friends. The chairman of the Arts Development Council is a really tough act to follow. And so I'm glad that I'm not doing this. I'm just the introductory remarks for this, okay? It's the panelists who are going to do this. And they will do the heavy lifting in this session. And we have an amazing list of 5 professionals at the top of their careers in extremely distinguished positions from really across the world, from Europe, from Australia, and of course in Hong Kong, to speak with us, I hope, from Singapore as well, close by, to speak with us about connecting with audiences. I think those of us who work in the arts, who care about the arts, who are ourselves consumers, although I'm not crazy about that word, who enjoy the arts, know that the audience is absolutely a critical part of that equation. Producing work which nobody hears, nobody sees, trees that fall in the forest. What is the value of that? And what is special about the 5 people that you will hear from, not only the positions that they occupy and the roles that they play, but I know 5 of them to be extremely thoughtful in their approach to what they do, and are people who question not only the how, but also and the what, but also the why. And impact is something that joins them all. So Dr. CAREY from Edinburgh, where the world's most famous arts festivals, plural, altogether happen. And she herself, of course, leads a younger festival, which has to do with the visual arts. I will not try and paraphrase from what I have heard of what I've seen of their presentations, but I will leave them to speak with you. Mr. Leong in the Hong Kong Jockey Club, the role of the Jockey Club in Hong Kong, the Charities Trust, and the work that they do impacts all lives of everyone in Hong Kong, not only in the arts. And I think that word impact is key to a lot of thinking behind the policy, behind what happens. The same, I think, is also true of Mrs. Daniel from Singapore. The National Arts Council, as I know it, has always had the research and things of nation building, things of the community, things of what it's doing so that it makes Singapore the distinctive place that it is, could be. How do we make that happen? How do you respond as the populations change, as the world changes, as Dr. Wong has mentioned in his introduction? And of course, Mr. MYER's organization also does fantastic research. We should see it. Just Google the links and you'll see. Evidence-based, very carefully defined parameters, and also responding to a changing population, changing demographics, and changing emphasis within the population itself. And again, it's about impact, it's about community, it's about reaching those people who the arts could serve. And in terms of reaching people to be served by the arts, FTech is an absolute model in Hong Kong. High impact organization, specifically targeting young people and changing lives in many, many ways. So I will leave you to hear from them. I won't be popping up and down if you don't mind, and so that you get the benefit of 5 presentations all in one go. And then I look forward very much to a discussion with everybody at the end of that.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Tisa, for such a warm introduction, and a huge thanks to Wilfred and the Hong Kong Arts Development Council for this wonderful invitation to come and speak today. It's amazing to have the chance to share Edinburgh's story and to hear from experts from all around the world talking about connecting arts and audiences. Edinburgh is a small city, very small city compared to Hong Kong, of 500,000 people. But we're very lucky to be the historic capital of Scotland and to host the world-renowned Edinburgh festivals, which each year attract 4.5 million attendances, second only to the Olympic Games, and of course we happen every year. Taking place against the beautiful backdrop of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, over the course of 70 years, our festivals have been shaped by the landscape which contains them, And it's not too dramatic to say that the festivals also reflect and shape the identities of our citizens. The city's own surveys show that every year, nearly 2/3 of households take part, and 80% of them agree that the festivals make the city a better place to live. We're very proud of our city and this high level of support and engagement that we enjoy from citizens. But of course, there are still too many people who think the festivals are not for them. And the question of the relevance of the festivals to the more disadvantaged citizens and to artists who are based in our communities is of growing importance in our civic and national debates. So today I want to share with you 2 recent examples of how Edinburgh's festivals have been working collaboratively to engage local cultural communities and citizens, city officials and independent organisations in both designing and delivering new opportunities together. Firstly, some brief context about the unique festival ecosystem that has been developed in our city, and I think which has given birth to a really fundamentally collaborative way of working across the city. Wilfred referenced the importance of collaboration, and I think in Edinburgh, in a very face-to-face personal way, we have been really championing collaboration. So to represent the kind of more analog historic approach, our festivals date back 70 years, with the very first festivals founded in 1947. You can see here a timeline of the growth of festival culture in our city. The very first festival, the International Festival, was conceived in a quite revolutionary idea for the day as a response to the global conflict of World War II, seeing in art and culture the means to bring people and nations back together in dialogue through showcasing world-leading performing arts. And in the same year, the Edinburgh Fringe was born, founded by a group of 8 theatre companies that weren't invited to the official festival. It's now and remains an uncurated open access festival, the largest performing arts festival in the world. The first Edinburgh International Film Festival also took place in 1947 and makes it now the longest continually running film festival in the world. So as these 3 festivals grew and reinvented themselves over the decades to react and to influence changes in British society, a wide range of different creative communities across the city saw how they provided a space for focus, energy and experiment, and also decided to adopt this festival approach. And you can see the range of those festivals there, culminating in the foundation most recently in 2004 of my own festival, the Edinburgh Art Festival, which is dedicated to presenting visual art in the month of August. So there are now 11 major festivals, and this slide shows what a diverse cluster we form, both in terms of audience numbers, so you have a sort of a scale of numbers going up the side, but also in terms of the times of year in which they are held, and this extraordinary phenomenon in August where we have 5 festivals all happening in the city at the same time, and the population of the city literally doubling over the course of 4 weeks. We think this unique range and diverse scale and specialism of our festivals is a really critical factor in our ability to connect local, national and international opportunities and to engage with local audiences. Because by working together as a year-round cluster, festivals with very different missions and specialisms can support each other to develop and to reach new audiences in complementary ways. The importance of this collaborative cluster approach was formally recognised in 2006 with the creation of Festivals Edinburgh, the collective development body for Edinburgh's major festivals, which I have the privilege to chair. And firstly, I must stress that Festivals Edinburgh is not an organisation that oversees the festivals. I think it would be hard to oversee 11 fiercely independent festival directors. Instead, each of the festivals, my own included, is their own fully independent organisation, raising their own funding, taking their own creative and business decisions. Instead, Festivals Edinburgh is the umbrella body that the festivals themselves decided to create as a vehicle to foster collaboration in agreed areas of shared priority and to represent a collective voice for the festivals with city leaders and national government. And one of the most successful outcomes of working in this way is how we've been able to bring together different city and national stakeholders. So we've created a stakeholder board, you can see in our jigsaw, called the Festivals Forum, which takes a strategic overview of the future success of the festival city. And it involves the city and national governments, as well as our economic development and tourism agencies, the Arts Council and business representatives. So I think this slide is sort of intended to give you a sense of some of the overlaps, I guess, in where we are working with these strategic stakeholders. By joining forces, the impact that we can achieve as a collective makes us far more relevant to the different agendas of each of those main stakeholders, and it allows us to engage in conversations that they wouldn't have had with us necessarily as individual organizations. Because we are working as a collective, they're willing to strategically invest in our cluster as a key local and national asset. So in 2015, we asked these stakeholders to work with us to produce a new shared 10-year vision looking at the opportunities and threats up to 2025. And this slide summarizes some of the key themes that came out of that strategy. But today, I really want to focus on the work that we've been doing in relation to the theme of deep and wide engagement. This was a key theme of the 2015 strategy, and highlighting how the festivals could support educational aims through greater social equity through participation in learning. So the first of those projects was looking at how we could work with the creative community in our city. A key concern for many of Edinburgh's artists and creatives is whether the city, as it becomes wealthier, is becoming unbalanced as a place of more cultural consumption than production. And it led to a citywide grassroots initiative called Desire Lines to talk about how we can improve access to and roots through culture. Festivals Edinburgh has been a key facilitator and leader in this debate, and as part of that, we have undertaken a mapping exercise, and you can sort of see our glorious map, which looked at how the festivals are intersecting with the local infrastructure and ecosystem. And we found that in 1 year we engaged with more than 500 independent artists across the city, 100 local arts organizations, offering opportunities through networking, advice and mentoring, as well as directly profiling artists in our own programs. We calculated that the value of this support was at least £500,000, which in a city of 500,000 people, I think, shows a strong evidence of the interdependencies in our systems. We've shown how a very vibrant local arts community is stronger thanks to the international opportunities that the festival can bring. My second example shows a more recent initiative from Festivals Edinburgh to connect diverse communities from across the city. And I want to preface that by saying that each of our festivals have long traditions of working individually with our communities. Our own festival, I'm showing an example of a big public art project we did last year. We've also worked with with community schools, intergenerational projects around this commission to reach communities in one of the more deprived areas of our city. But we realized that through working together as 11 festivals, we can significantly increase the impact across the city. And one of the ways in which we've piloted doing this is by working to build a citizen champion body. In the 70th anniversary, we developed a new project that engages with new local community volunteers in our peak festival season and gives them the skills training to share their enthusiasm with visitors to the city. This picture shows some of our volunteers from this summer meeting Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and I think that demonstrates the extent to which that collaborative approach with high-level city stakeholders is really working. We were originally inspired by the volunteering programme of the London Olympic Games in 2012, but we realised that we have an even better opportunity to build cumulative impact with these kinds of projects because we happen every year in our city. So I'm going to finish there, but look forward to discussing more in the debate.
So, but really, I do have two messages to share with you today. I'm hoping to perhaps use 2-3 minutes to give you an overview of what sort of the Hong Kong Jockey Club and the Jockey Club Charities Trust, what we do with the trust. And then perhaps a little bit more time on addressing today's question about arts and audience. Disclaimer, I'm definitely not an expert in the field of arts. Perhaps consider myself a friend of artists, but that's pretty much it. Now, very quickly, the Hong Kong Jockey Club, we're quite unique in the world in a sense of, there's no shareholders in the club. So it is almost the only business model globally if you consider any other jockey clubs in other jurisdictions. We basically operate 4 major units, if you will, from world-class racing to responsible wagering and lottery. These are sort of generating the income. And then we also operate a membership club and, of course, the charities and communities through the Charities Trust. So if you think about the quantum of the club is the single largest taxpayer in Hong Kong. So we pay up to almost $22 billion of tax last year. And also we are globally, we're one of the top 10 non-government foundations. So last year we donated 7.6 billion Hong Kong dollar. And then we also contribute to the lottery fund, which is then measured by the social welfare department. It is a very long history for the club to have been doing this. So the club was established in 1884, over 130 years ago. But from official record anyway, we trace back our first donation happened in 1915. So there was perhaps the time in First World War. We don't exactly know what the donation was about, but it was a 2,000 pound, I think, to a Prince of Wales fund in England. So that was then in 1915, and we have really gone through a very, very long journey today. Now we rank 7th among the global non-government foundations. So you have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation of the world, you have the Ford Foundation of the world right up there. If you look at also what we have done overall in the last 100 plus years through the Charities Trust, I think we started off probably mostly in the 1950s when there were a huge influx of people from the north coming into Hong Kong. So at that time, I think the government was very busy, obviously dealing with all sorts of issues to accommodate these people. The Jockey Club then really went in to start with swimming pools, community swimming pools, and also a lot of public clinics. So I don't know about you, but actually quite a few of my friends and my generation, they were all born in one of these Jockey Club community clinics. Maybe some of you too. And then, sort of fast forward, we built the Ocean Park, and not only the Jockey Club built the Ocean Park, so it's not just donating money. We actually operated the Ocean Park for 10 years before handing it over to the government. We also helped build the University of Science and Technology, and then the Khao Sai Chow Golf Course. And I think one very critical contribution, I guess, to the art scene is also the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts. So we have the vice president here, I guess. So this is, I think, we feel all very, very proud of. And subsequently, or currently working, I will come to that a little bit later, is the Central Police Station, Dai Guan. So we're hoping to open it soon. But at least we have hired our very good director, Tim Cunnin, who sits there. If any questions, please go to him. It's not me. So again, if you look at the overall, this is the last slide about the Jockey Club Charities Trust. This is what we have done over the last 10 years. You have also seen a huge increase in terms of annual giving to the community. So last year, our regular giving was at 4.1 billion Hong Kong dollars, so roughly $500 million US dollar. And we also had a one-time donation to support the Hong Kong Palace Museum. So that brings the total to 7.6. A very quick summary. So about 12 billion in the last 3 seasons, roughly 50% software, 50% hardware, and art, culture, and heritage is definitely one of our very key strategic initiatives. So when it comes to arts, this is the way we think about sort of the arts, culture, and heritage. I don't think this is any surprise to anyone here. I mean, we talk to a lot of people in the field and try to come up with this framework. So it is about infrastructure, about talent, about audience and programs. I think this we can perhaps quickly move on. The way we look at it, though, is that we're still refining this vision, mission, and strategic priorities. But currently, that's what we think. Right? So for us, we think that capacity building and infrastructure in arts and culture sector is very, very important. Right? So that goes to artists, that goes to talent, and then we try to come up with different programs to support that. And then we believe audience building and reinforcing public education is also very, very important. Right? So we're also building up different programs to support that. Improve accessibility to the arts, and also art as a tool to tackle social issues, which I think to us, this is probably one area we will try to put a lot more emphasis into in the next few years. When we talk about audience building, right? So to us, it's beyond just coming in to appreciate art. It is about how you then bring art to certain people who might not even think art is related to them. But then art, culture, and potential heritage can in fact have a huge impact on their life. So this is a big piece that we, or our team, is spending quite a bit of time thinking through, bringing them particularly to a lot of the disadvantaged groups. And then finally is the heritage revitalization for the general public. Right. So if I may go through one by one very quickly, I think in terms of capacity building infrastructure, I don't need to go through all these different programs, but I think to us, particularly on the talent development side is very important. So we help the Music and Dance Fund since the 80s, and particularly say we have supported Art Festival for the last 46 years. And a couple of the big programs are actually in contemporary dance, in grooming local talents. So these, I think, all sort of in our heart, even when we go say capacity building or infrastructure, is not necessarily sort of the hard kind of infrastructure that we're talking about. Audience building and accessibility of art, I think similarly, it is different through different programs, Art Fest or La French May, and may I also again emphasize, even in these big sort of art festivals and programs, our funding also we prefer, or at least a large part of funding goes to education, goes to bringing underprivileged groups, particularly students, bringing them to the venue so that they can be inspired as well. And of course, we work with LCSD quite often, 3 mega exhibitions a year. And I think this year is particularly encouraging. One of the exhibitions, the Mummy Show, I don't know if you have been to the Mummy Show, but it brings 850,000 people to the show, just one show. Slightly more than the population in Edinburgh, if I remember it correctly. And of course, the Art Development Council, we're working on the New Arts Power. Now, this is the point that I emphasize, is how do we then use art actually as a tool to tackle social issues? We've tried many things in the last 2-3 years, and we will continue to try new things. And we will really welcome your feedback and your ideas on how we can do even better in that sense. Right? I mean, Music Compass, or similarly, a lot of similar programs like Music Fish, similar programs like the El Sistema in Venezuela. So we're using music, we're using instrument, we're using discipline to help underprivileged kids to have an access to build esteem and self-confidence. Right? So that's one kind of program. Hand-in-hand capable theater, I actually try to, I try to do what we call in business the mystery shopping once with this group. So I sent my children, my boy, 13 years old, I sent him for an audition there. He didn't get the slot. But I got to see the whole process. It was fun. They actually, what they do is they open up to people with different kind of challenges, whether they're sitting on wheelchairs or whether they have visual impairments. But through a rehearsal process, that they eventually put up a show on stage with people from different sort of challenges. I think that's really a life-changing experience, not just I think for the performers themselves, but also for the audience. When you see how a visually impaired person can actually go on stage when the light was dim and when things can be confusing. So I'm not going to go through all that because I'm reminded that time's up. So last but not least, heritage revitalization, and I have to say one word about Daigun, maybe 10 words. This is a site in Central, and promise you to be great. There will be 16 heritage buildings and 2 new buildings. Hopefully we can open it sometime the next year. But tomorrow, I think Tim will be here to tell you more about Daigun. I hope you can all, perhaps the next time when we have this conference, we will invite all of you to come on site for a private tour. So with that, thank you very much.
Well, very good afternoon, Dr. Wilfred Wong, Chairman, Hong Kong Arts Development Council, friends, colleagues in the arts. I really must begin by thanking my friends in the Arts Development Council, Hong Kong, for this excellent arrangement. The warm hospitality is really quite overwhelming. Thank you for organizing this. This is my first time here. I realize now what a great platform this is for bringing so many like-minded practitioners and leaders who have, I think, many common issues to share. And so it's my privilege to be here. And I think I'm asked to speak at a topic that is very close to our hearts at the moment, because in Singapore, really, it's been a journey. I want to start off by just sharing briefly, maybe it's a short journey compared to some of you. As you know, we are 50 years as an independent country. But over the last 20 years, we've been very busy with infrastructure. You see some of the infrastructure we've put in place. We've revamped our museums. The Jubilee year in 2015, when we turned 50 as a young independent nation, was an opportunity for us to put a lot of attention to really sprucing up infrastructure, which has been around for a while. Several of our monuments now are really housing our museums and galleries. The latest kid on the block was really National Gallery, which is today boasting really a collection of hopefully good Southeast Asian art and also Singapore art in one location. The National Arts Council, together with its parent ministry, has also been spending a lot of time sort of putting basics in place to build artistic capabilities and really to establish arts groups and companies and communities. And so also with that, we decided that we had to harness beyond government funding really support for the arts from the people and the private sector, especially the corporate community. And in doing that, a very significant step that we did a few years ago was really to have a very good, generous support from the government in the form of a cultural matching fund. That's about $350 million Sing, which I think translates to about 1.5 billion Hong Kong, dollar for dollar matching. And that's the commitment the government decided to make to really harness and kind of like activate private sector giving. So it's good. It's worked in the sense that today about half of that has been drawn down, and that shows that it really tapped into quite a rich vein of giving, especially from the corporate sector. What we need to do a lot better is really to learn how to do crowdfunding and telling our Singaporean audiences that really every dollar counts. We haven't done that very well, but I'm glad to say that the large amount of corporate giving has really given us a boost. We have always had in place tax deduction scheme of 2.5 times, and that has also helped us. So that's where we are. And the next phase, we see it as something which, as I said, the topic is very close to our hearts. We are going to spend a lot more time to understand our audiences and to understand how the arts can really reach deep to resonate with audiences and through the arts to really unleash many things which are really good for the long term in society. So at the National Arts Council, which is where I come from, we really do believe that the role of the arts is going to be increasingly important as we develop our economy and society. Connecting through the arts is really very core to the NAC's mission and vision, which I share here. You can see that we, of course, want to nurture creative excellence, and we, at the same time, however, realize that we have to bring along audiences through deeper engagement and participation. So our vision and mission really reflects our hope and ambition to really, through the arts, engender a deep sense of connection with Singapore's unique multicultural identity. As you might know, Singapore really is a multicultural society, and that to us really speaks to our identity. And we try through the arts, the way that we make art, the way that we reach out to audiences to bring that alive to Singaporeans. So we really recognize that the arts, if we do it well, can really inspire Singaporeans of all age groups can really connect communities of different types, and also a way for us to position Singapore globally, to bring our arts abroad, to get friends internationally to understand what Singapore is about. We did a nationwide population survey not too long ago in 2015, and we were very happy to know that attendance and participation in arts events had reached a pretty high point in a decade. And we also know that those who have already engaged in the arts, they have actually stayed with the arts. So we've succeeded in anchoring people who really have an affinity to the arts. But what we found challenging, and that's going to be really occupying our minds going forward, is really how to tap new audiences, especially those who currently don't engage in the arts or, for that matter, have little access or opportunity to access the arts. How do we then, if we aspire to make the arts an integral part of lives in Singapore, how can we actually better get the arts to be accessible to people from all walks of life? So that's really the challenge for us. And we thankfully are not alone in this. We are trying to get our arts groups to also think that way. So I just want to give acknowledgement to the importance of the arts community by putting them first, by saying that they have done their part. What you see here is actually a drama box has done this. This is a leading Singapore Chinese theatre group. And what they've done is they really created a pop-up theatre space in neighborhoods as a means to connect communities and experience, allow them to experience community theatre. We figured that it's all very well. Singapore is very small. Those of you who visited will know that we're really very small, 700 square kilometers, that's all. So it's not difficult for us to bring people to the civic district where a lot of our institutions are. But we also realize that you have to go to where people live, work, and play, especially when you're talking about people who don't often access the arts. So community spaces are very important for us now to activate, to make them vibrant, and so that we can reach out to those communities. So we have this is an example of a community project by an arts group. But on our part, of course, we've done things on a very large scale. We've now got 15 what we call community arts and culture nodes all over Singapore. And so we work with libraries, with schools, with community centers, hawker centers, and even in the void decks of our many housing estates. So that challenge has been to really connect with people who are running those spaces, to understand also the demographics and the profile of that community, so that at the local level, we actually are delivering the arts in a manner that really makes sense to the character and the identity of that neighborhood. And these kinds of programs have really become regular launchpads for us now to bring arts activities to the doorsteps of where people live. We've also tried to activate our arts practitioners to connect with these spaces, and we've brought them also into the community to help us deliver these programs. We certainly, I had the opportunity to speak about this topic, so I'll just move this very quickly through. Certainly, one of the very big strategies is, of course, how do we reach out to the young? And this is where we very systematically now are thinking through in terms of the different stages that they go through, all the way from preschool, as you can see here, to primary and secondary school. So, for instance, here you see incubator spaces for people, babies as young as a few months old. And we have a very good agency called the Early Childhood Agency that's partnering the NAC in this. At the school level, again, I think, touched on this briefly yesterday at the other plenary, at the ACCF. So again, very quickly to say that we are systematic about working with the Ministry of Education as well to deliver arts programming at different levels of their education. So we've had the opportunity to bring thousands of primary 4 students to the museums, the National Museum. Some of the objects are now in the syllabus, and we want to finish the experience of bringing them for very structured visits to the museums where they relate the objects they read in the history curriculum with the objects that they are now seeing in the galleries. And we're trying to follow that through when teachers go back with online learning resources so that they can sort of follow through the experience. I talked also very briefly about this fantastic experiment that seemed to have worked quite well, where we have introduced about 5,000 kids now, 4,000 to 5,000 kids, to the National Orchestra and with electronic music coming together to lower the barriers to entry to a space we call the Esplanade, and that's our national theatre. We take this for granted, but really many kids do feel that sense of awe and that sort of barrier to entering, a 2,300 seater, huge auditorium, and so that sort of, helps them to sort of break down that barrier and to hopefully build future audiences. We have another platform which is called Noise, and this is really from a small movement of just activating a few programs now to actually becoming a big movement of young people who come together with the great support of industry partners to create together. Someone mentioned the word co-create, and I think this is where Noise is a platform where we expect the young to really create their own opportunities to reach out to other young people. And last year, I'm happy to say that this festival has attracted 41,000 to participate, and many of them are young people. It would not be complete for me to say that the arts doesn't reach, is something that we really have to do also for the other end, the active elderly. We have really a lot of really great opportunities to tap what we call the graciously active elderly population. And this is the one which we call the active, really the silver arts programming. And you see some of these happy faces here, and it's very powerful to see how seniors can really relate to the arts. We also have, very quickly, just to show you that we've, of course, got our programs for the people who are underserved and underprivileged. And we haven't forgotten the need for digital engagement, and we've been working very hard to this piece. We understand now that really online audiences are really everything, so we're working very hard to this piece to really see how the arts can really reach out in different ways, especially to the young demographics. Last but not least, and I guess this is why I'm here, and this is that we understand also that internationalization is a very important strategy. There are international audiences who look to Singapore for other things, and we also want to try and understand how to really profile Singapore arts overseas. All right, I'm going to stop here, and I hope to really take some interesting topics for discussion later. I'm convinced that many of us in the audience really are facing challenging times, but I think the solutions can be jointly together shared. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Wong, thank you for the introduction. Tisa, colleagues, it's a great honour to be again at the Roundtable in Hong Kong. If we were in Australia, I'd begin by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. But we're not in Australia, but I do that just to give a flavour of being in Australia and the way that we'd introduce remarks like this. I've been reflecting on the excellent topic that we have, where do the arts lead us? And reflecting on it in the context of some of the remarks over the last 2 days. The Japanese culture minister spoke yesterday about how the same content can now be enjoyed in real time globally. And she also spoke about rural and regional towns having to prepare themselves to receive visitors and support the revival of their local economies. Last night, I liked that Hong Kong's chief executive spoke about creative and commercial vitality as the two edge of the same thing. As a consequence, I've decided to speak to a slightly different topic, and the spooling images that are happening behind me are slightly closer to the talk that I was going to give. They give, of course, some visual representation to the diversity of audiences, and they give validation to some of the recent Australia Council research on audience participation. Now, I hope you won't be too disappointed that I'm not going to specifically present that research. It is all online, but I am going to talk about an application of that research. So, drawing on it, I want you to imagine that we're not in Hong Kong, but we're in the town of Hamilton, a 4-hour drive west of Melbourne, with a population of 10,000 people. A prosperous town with an art gallery, a library, cultural facilities and performance spaces. For over 60 years, the gallery has built a collection of decorative arts, glass, Japanese ceramics and British watercolours. Why, you might say? Because that's what wealthy Australian collectors did in the 19th century and the 20th century, and then they gifted those collections to public institutions. Last week, I was invited to speak there to an audience of local politicians, benefactors, gallery staff, local government staff, and the local community to draw on audience data and research to support the case for a new gallery. I consider that knowledge of audiences really serves no inherent purpose unless it's being used for some end. So this in part is what I said. I started by saying, let me start at the end and then backtrack. Public and philanthropic investment in the arts generally, and art galleries specifically, produce not only economic benefits for the community, they create community confidence, provide cultural definition, particularly to diverse communities, and enhance well-being whilst being enlightening, energising, and an inexhaustible source of pleasure. I'm conscious that there might be some who'd say, well, he would say that. He's the chair of the Australia Council for the Arts. What else is he going to say? So why do I feel so confident that what I'm asserting is reliable? A few months ago, in an Australia Council board meeting, we discussed the results of the National Arts Participation Survey. This is a major study that has continued over 20 years, mapping the changing attitudes of Australians towards the arts. There are some remarkable numbers. 79% read books, 72% attend live events, 46% creatively participate themselves, 35% attended First Nations arts in 2016, doubling the 2009 figure. However, even more significant than all of these is that the survey confirms that 98% of Australians participate in the arts in some manner. 98%. It needn't be our guilty secret. We should speak with far greater confidence than we do that people have shown through their actions that art and culture are valuable to them. And given that 1/3 of Australians live in regional Australia, we can be confident that arts and culture are important to all of us too. For interest, the National Gallery Victoria in Melbourne is now the 16th most visited art gallery in the world. More of us visited art galleries last year in Australia than attended football games, by a significant margin. In Tasmania, from scratch, in only 8 years, annual attendances at the Museum of the Old and New Art, MONA, is in excess of 400,000 people, and almost 75% were inbound tourists, that is, not locals. I suppose it helps that Hobart is now one of the coolest places on the planet, according to several travel magazines. Guess what made that happen? Art and culture. Who would ever have thought that the Dark Mofo Festival in Hobart, in the coldest part of the country, at the coldest time of the year, would lure vast audiences from around the nation and from around the world, as well as a few locals, or that nearly 9 million Australians would attend festivals. Visitors to cultural events tend not to sleep on sofas at their friends' houses as though they were coming for the footy. They buy hotel rooms. They tend not to bring their packed lunches from home, as they might to attend a game. They eat in cafes and restaurants. They tend not to arrive immediately before and leave immediately afterwards. They linger and add other activities to their programs and often stay for days. So what's going on here, and why is it really important for those in charge of the policy levers at a national, state and local level to understand what's happening? And why is it worth the philanthropic investment? Whilst the economic story is convincing and compelling, in the words of one of my Australia Council colleagues, Kate Fielding, who lives in Kalgoorlie, Western Australia, which is about as remote as you can get, and who's one of our leading thinkers in arts and culture, she says it's the other stuff that matters more, the things that are hard to measure, almost impossible. How do you measure tolerance, respect, the value of thinking creatively, empathy, community cohesion? The arts and engagement in the arts provide one of the best tools we have to engage positively with cultural diversity as a point of interest and learning rather than a point of difference, opposition and conflict. I've just mentioned some of the statistics that I find most useful for explaining how the value of arts and culture is already measured. I use these particular ones because, in Kate's words, they help me quickly and clearly address the most common negative assumptions I encounter, namely, not many people care about arts and culture are only a city thing, there are no jobs in creative work, and arts and culture aren't useful. Or one of my favourites, sports stadiums are more useful. And consider this, recent world-leading research from Western Australia on the art of being mentally healthy found that similar to the 30 minutes a day of exercise having a positive impact on one's physical well-being, Engagement in the arts for enjoyment, entertainment, or as a hobby for 2 or more hours a week is associated with good mental well-being. There's a further beautiful quote out of that research. If health is more than the absence of disease, pain, and sickness, and is more about adaptation, understanding, and acceptance, then the arts may be more powerful than anything medicine has to offer. This is not fanciful. The participation survey that I referred to found that Australians believe the arts have a powerful role to play in promoting social cohesion. This is perhaps the most interesting. It highlights one of the most powerful impacts arts and culture can have, building community confidence. A measure of business and consumer confidence is people's willingness to take risks and to invest in different ways within the market. I think about community confidence in a similar way. How willing are people to take risks within their community? How willing are they to invest in their community? How might you gather up all these factors to advocate for greater local, state and Commonwealth commitment and philanthropic support for cultural projects? How can the projects themselves define that support and drive it? First, you need to understand what you are trying to do. You must be clear and single-minded about how you build your case. Second, you need to think really hard about who you are trying to convince, who your broad audience is. You must understand their motivations and interests, be persuasive, and progressively convert your evidence into their belief. Third, you need to find a way to respond to someone who might say, I'm not really into the arts. I read a few books. I listen to music while I work out. When we go to Melbourne, we take the kids to the art gallery and we take them to the festival here in town. I guess if there's an Australian film at the cinema, we try and go and see it, but yeah, I'm not really into the arts. Even when people seem unattached to the idea of arts and culture, try to remember that it may be as simple as them not realising that it is something that is already critical to their daily life and that they value. Accepting that art does matter, why might it specifically matter to Hamilton and specifically to the gallery in which I'm speaking? What might cultural leadership in a place like Hamilton look like for the second quarter of this century? What does a leadership role in regional Australia mean, and what might the consequences be of not seeking a leadership role and of becoming less culturally confident? How do you take the chance to refresh what you already have, honour the support given by others over many years, and create vitality for the community? In the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to observe, often quite closely, how others have approached these questions, both in regional and metropolitan areas, as well as internationally. I get asked, what is a reasonable aspiration? I prefer to respond by asking back, what is an unreasonable aspiration? My encouragement is to be unreasonable. At the heart of what you do should be cultural relevance, enjoyment, and fun. This is not solemn duty. The scoping should certainly be a fact-based body of work, and it should inspire and draw a community together and along. Look carefully at the way public money is now pouring into cultural projects in Tasmania. Why? It's because of a core belief within the community that it is good for the community, a core belief that it is a great investment, and a core belief that it generates pride and confidence. To achieve any of this, you need rock-solid local community support and an almost militant activism. It also requires strong government support, passionate, resolute, and driven. It must be collaboration. Develop a clear idea about what your strengths are and how to connect them. What have folk festivals, ceramics awards, fashion lectures, exhibitions, art prizes, festivals got to do with each other? Make a cultural cluster of them, and the question will answer itself. The significance of the event, project, program, exhibition needs to extend way beyond the local community that's developing it and that it's serving. It might no longer be that community's anymore. You will be doing it on behalf of other people. I concluded my remarks at Hamilton by saying that the most successful examples that I have observed are where an entrepreneurial vision takes hold and is all-consuming. You are no longer just custodians of a collection, but entrepreneurs, cultural entrepreneurs. You will need to be engaged with communities far away, creating unmissable cultural experiences. So that's one place that the arts might lead us, to drawing a community together in pursuit of a great cultural idea, using data and turning evidence into core belief. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having the absolutely fabulous theatre connection with you today. As you can see, we are into arts education and arts in education, and by the by, I will explain that. Can I first of all say that maybe next year we should have some engineering companies, design companies, electricity companies, people in the STEM business in the audience as well, because the arts are for everybody. It's not just for those of us who believe in the arts, so you might think about that next year. Obviously, we all need our programs to connect to audiences, and connecting the arts to the audience is definitely one side of the equation. May I, however, offer that there is another side to the equation, which is to upscale the audience to the arts through arts and arts education. And arts in education. And by that, I'm not simply referring to teaching a young person how to draw, how to sing, how to dance. I am seriously talking about the critical thinking side of arts education, making our young people thinkers. So the creativity and the critical side, I think we need to deal with. By taking care of the audience through educational offers as a matter of principle, and not when only there is resources, I think the audience will be able to meet us faster halfway, and thereby completing a cycle which is both enhancing and virtuous. This is how we believe we can deal with changes that are always on our doorsteps. Definitely, you may well ask, it is already difficult enough as the arts sector to look after this enterprise. Why are we dealing with arts education, arts in education? And I use this interchangeably. Why do it at all? I think there are three reasons. First of all, we would like our audience or our participants to be mindfully present and not just physically there. Secondly, if there is further recognition of the arts and its potential, I think the audience will move from looking to seeing, from hearing to really listening, and from gaping, participating, to really engaging. But thirdly, I personally think most important of all is audienship is about our collective audience making better informed, more valuable, and sophisticated demands on the works of art and on the quality of the arts that we all do. And hence, this is the macro view of why arts education is so important. So audienship to us through arts education, arts in education, is about the process. Of course, the product will come afterwards. And at AFTEC, these are the three strategic areas that we work on: learning and participation, youth empowerment, and in particular, arts for change. The education system, as many of us know it in our countries, really has come from an industrial age where we manufacture exactly the same mold. This is called a fixed mindset, and it is completely right to say that with a fixed mindset, we are not going to be able to meet all the challenges and the changes on our doorstep. Or as the very famous poet and a creative writer Peter Abt says, education systems nowadays are inimical to creativity and authentic learning. High-stakes testing and sink or swim mentality in our education systems make our societies risk-averse. In the 21st century, in order to change, we cannot be risk-averse. And therefore, the arts and creativity are so important to all our work. Arts are for all. These are medical students at Hong Kong University. We teach them year 1, year 2 drama, music, and dance. In the next 3 years, under the aegis of Mr. CHEUNG's Jockey Club, we will be working with social workers in order to cascade the arts to as many people as possible. We take our young people through acting and life skills. This is fencing classes in Lambda in London, or at Cloudgate Dance Theatre in Taipei, and they have really tough tasks to do at the Tate Modern. Back home in the Saiwanho Civic Centre, we have young theatre makers, and they critique excerpts from plays, not simply act them. Children also can go to our immersive theatre, and this is where I would like to stop for a moment. Oh, by the way, we also do relaxed theatre for autistic spectrum disorders, young people learning difficulties. Here, we've just finished 6 successful years of From Page to Stage workshops and theatre production with the Jockey Club, and the program is now sustained by a government organization, so I'm very happy to announce that. For the 2018 project, we now have over 13,000 for this single project, 13,000 teenagers coming in, 28 shows, 99 secondary schools. And out of that, there are 75 secondary schools that have returned to us time and again. 56% have been with us for 1 to 3 years, and 44% have been with us for 4 to 7 years. We take risks in our programming because it is important for the organizations to grow and for young people and schools to know that the arts are simply much more than just learning how to dance. What do we think is important? Oh, this is relaxed theatre with autism spectrum disorders, young people on stage having their tactile fun. And this is a critical thinking program for underprivileged program in primary schools. So all that figures sounds really attractive, but seriously, where do the arts lead us? Like Rupert, I think it's a really amazing topic. Well, I'll tell you where it has led AFTEC for the last few years. So we have novices coming into this program, and then we have excited novices, and then we have regular novices. So as you can see, we have been on the novice level for the last 3 to 4 years. I am not complaining. I mean, having 13,000 people come into your theater is something to really be happy about. But more importantly, we've taken a tangram approach. And if you do not know what a tangram is, it's actually a Chinese puzzle with 7 fixed pieces. And what is a tangram approach? We cannot be always teaching every single young person, or adult in fact, so why not give them the tools to be able to do this? With the tools to understand the arts, to appreciate it, to participate in it, each young person with the same 7 components under the tangram approach, they will be able to interpret, they will be able to learn how to learn, and that is how they will adapt to change. You will ask, can this tangram approach really reduce the linearity of novices from novice to excited novice to regular novice towards a more organic model? I can resoundingly tell you that in our last 9 years, it is possible. However, there are no shortcuts. It does take time. And I'm sure after this, Wilfred is going to kick me out because contrary to what he said, I think we have to slow down. I really think we have to stop, get the basics right, and then I won't leap, you won't leap. Our young people will leap for us. And we've seen this happening at our programs. So we've been working on something looking like this. So bronze, silver, gold, novice, apprentice, connoisseurship, using some of the bigger words, if you would like. These levels are now inbuilt into all our projects for a meaningful ecology. Of course, we're still evolving. We are a learning organization. We will never stop learning. We are always making mistakes. These are some of the quotes. I don't know if you can read it in red. They are written by 13 to 18-year-olds as part of our Brownville Hong Kong Youth Theatre Awards. It's been ongoing since 2013. The top 2 will give you an understanding of how through the tangram approach, they are getting deeper into acting skills and the totality of theatre. So depth and understanding, reading beyond words to make a genuine connection with the audience. They wrote it. I didn't write it for this conference. The bottom 2 quotes are what the arts can really do to change lives. The greatest obstacle to learning, this boy who is academically non-gifted, but who is very good in acting, he's been totally changed because of theatre. Not necessarily because of ours, I'm sure you do a lot of good things. And Kaya has discovered the value of kindness, which is what Rupert has been saying, or what Dr. CAREY has been saying. The empathy, the kind of human values, I think we tend to forget in the arts because all of us are so busy chasing funding to deliver programs that we forget certain things. This is called the growth mindset, in which they meet challenges, they are persevering, they work hard in order to master acting or dancing or whatever. They take criticism, and most importantly, they actually are inspired by other people's success and not threatened by it. I would call this the upward spiral. And it takes funders, artists, arts organizations, teachers, schools, government to work together. Therefore, we need a cultural policy that would work and that is integrative. So at AFTEC, we have witnessed that when the audience is facilitated up to the arts through the tangram approach, programs become more meaningful. And let me give you an example. Tiffany and Marco, 2013, started with us as a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old from very local schools, or what we call lower banding schools. I don't believe this. They don't speak English. They joined one of our programs, Bravo. They are still with us 5 years on. Yes, 5 years on, nearly. This last summer, they were at the Eden Project being apprentice. They were in London, and what did they do? They bought tickets to see Hamlet. And these are young people who do not even see English theatre in Hong Kong. So the point really is the arts do change lives. The matter is, what do we do in arts education in order to motivate them? And hopefully, over time, they will change. In a city where everything about being the fastest to the finishing line is considered generally to be the only kind of success, I think those of us in the arts really must stop and pay attention to the values of the arts for a change. By having arts education as the foundation to this audienceship cycle, the programs that companies produce will make further sense and will be further appreciated. Funders' dollars will go a longer way. So we're looking at blue chip funding, ladies and gentlemen, not hedge funds, because we are dealing with human beings here. As much as I love the digital aspects of life, I really think for once we've got to stop and get in place really good arts and education programs so that the young people will leap ahead and make great changes for us. Thank you very much.
Okay, on behalf of everybody in the room, first, thank you. That is truly inspiring, and I love being reminded of the value of what we do and the impact that it can have on communities, on individuals, and I love particularly Lynn's at the end that it takes time. It takes both Rupert and Rosa talked about research and data and the need for that. And also in Edinburgh, there is the need for involving the community and working together in clusters and thinking about what we do and why we do it. It's wonderful to have these values. We know them inherently. We, as Lynn says, in chasing the dollar, we forget them now and then. But I know that we have at least 3 people who provide funding on the stage. And we all of us need to work with people who provide funding, and they also have their, and we have the ADC in the room, you know, very prominently so. You have your own needs, and it includes measurements. It includes data, it includes numbers. How does one measure for impact? You can measure head count, okay? How many people came, how many people saw, how many bought tickets, etc. How do you measure, how do you quantify, how do you begin to address the things, the deeper level of the significance that we were talking about and thinking about? Perhaps we can just go around in the same order. Would you mind?
That's just working automatically. Excellent. So I think it's a really important question, because I think we probably all collectively in our sector have been on a journey where I suppose precisely because we all need resources to fund the work that we do, we are working together with funders to align ourselves to their objectives. And certainly in Edinburgh, we've been on a journey from thinking carefully and building a very strong case for the economic impact that the festivals have for the city, both for the city itself and the country as a whole, to thinking about how we can actually really measure impact, about the social impact of the festivals, the way in which the festivals build a sense of a quality of life, a sense of well-being, intellectual stimulation, and so on. And as part of the study that I referenced, the impact study in 2016, we actually conducted a pretty extraordinary cultural survey where we had 30,000 respondents responding to questions about the festival, including, critically for us for the first time, qualitative questions, and a really residing sense, a very strong sense out of that survey, over 90% of people saying that they felt that the festivals and their cultural offering and the quality of the cultural offering was actually one of the things that made Edinburgh such a unique and special place to live. So I think it's a sort of also demonstrates a demand for that work and the extent to which we're working in partnership with the city to deliver that experience they've come to expect.
Right. I guess I answer that in a couple of ways. The first is to understand and to make our other stakeholders who fund up the Arts Council, right? So funders are also funded by other people. So we also have those difficult conversations. But I think it's very important to understand that the arts is a sector that has very long-term consequences and impact. You cannot deliver results overnight. It is intergenerational across time. And so the conversations we have are always about multi-year journey towards targets and KPIs. I would also make the second point, and that is that in funding, I think the Arts Council in Singapore is very mindful that you do two things. One is broad-based funding and answering to the as necessary, the stakeholders who are demanding results for their funding or their sponsorship in terms of numbers, targets, and so on. And that kind of broad-based funding needs to be really amplified by targeted funding to get those results. But as importantly, having funding that really is broad-based is important because the broad-based funding that is really about a facilitative environment for the arts, in our minds, allows others, especially the arts community, to define impact in their ways. Because it's a very different language. The arts practitioners and communities define impact very differently from what maybe bureaucrats and policymakers do. And broad-based facilitative funding really grows the arts for them to define what's impact.
Thanks.
Look, I think in the case of the Australia Council, I mean, one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is how you measure vitality. And I think that's really at the heart of what this discussion is, and different forms and measurements of vitality and the different metrics that you might use in order to measure it. I mean, increasingly our approach has been what might often be described in business is a balanced scorecard approach, where there are a number of different components that get measured in different ways, and that builds up an overall impression of the impact that different arts projects and organisations are having. So that's one comment around the balanced scorecard. The second is there's obviously a very real difference between multi-year funding for an organisation and measuring that year by year, and then the impact at the end of a funding cycle, in contrast to a one-off project that has some very specific outcomes and very specific measurables around that particular project. So within the arts, it's hardly surprising then we do have apples, pears and bananas in a sense as a way of measuring what the impact is of different pieces of funding and support along the way.
Yeah, this is obviously a very difficult question, I think, not just for arts and culture funding, but to be honest, for any sort of philanthropic foundations, when they think about social impact, I think it's always a very challenging question. To us at the Jockey Club Charities Trust, the way we look at it is we look at our projects through really 4 dimensions. We call them outcome indicators. So we try to look at whether there is behavioral change, whether there is attitude change, whether there is conditions change, and whether the project continue to build up knowledge for the field. So we call it a back system. Should be more forward, but anyway, we pick back, B-A-C-K, so behavior, attitude, condition, and knowledge. Of course, I agree with Rupert, because when you look at things from a project perspective and from a long-term, using government words, subvention perspective, it can be very, very different. Because on a project basis, sometimes you tend to ignore the capacity building side of things, whereby in a more long-term funding, you can also look at organization growth as part of the indicators. So I think different foundations or government agencies or different bodies, we all have different preferences and priorities. I think exactly like what you said, we have also our stakeholders to answer to. So it can't be one foundation or one government agency fits everyone's needs. I think it's a little bit, on the foundation side, government agency side, we ought to, think more forward. But then on the applicant side, they also need to choose and pick, who are the best foundations, who are the best government agencies they should work with.
30 years ago, when I was very young, I did not believe in assessment or evaluation. Why should a funder come and tell us that we're doing this well and not? Do they know anything about the arts? 30 years later, well, no, seriously, we have to have a decent dialogue. My best funders are the funders who really talk shop and who really align with values. So Mr. Cheung is right. Not every funding organization is right. For something like the Bravo Youth Theatre Awards, we actually use the back model, and we actually use the Kirkpatrick model as well. So those of us in the arts needing grant like us, a charity, we need to speak their language. Because it's easier for us to speak the language than for them to speak our language. So who wants the money? If you don't want the money, forget it. Speak your own language. But I have a charity to run. We have grown from 1.5 persons to 15. There are good projects, I believe. The way we measure is qualitatively. The young people or even our volunteers, they do a lot of reflections. And I'm quite serious, it's like homework. And through collecting all the reflections, we are able to actually gauge how they change. And as a result, we could come up with such quotes. So it's the stories that tell things. But how do you change stories into numbers, into grades? Well, that's called creativity.
Please.
Sorry, if I may add one more comment. I think at least to us in the foundation, in the Charities Trust, what we usually discuss is, why do you need those measurements for? I mean, we don't set them up as sort of a test, a DSE, to say you fail, you pass, you excel. I don't think that's the purpose. I think the purpose is more to say, what have we learned over that period? Now, if there's no measurement, no outcome, we don't know what we have learned. And we all know society is changing. Generation XYZ, their behavior is very different. How people look at art, culture, and heritage also are very different. So sometimes without those measurement or data, you actually don't know, or it's hard to gauge where the audience is moving. So I think part and parcel is we like to use some of these measurements as an input to then the next funding cycle.
Thanks very much. And if we don't have a conversation in the audience, we won't know how other people are thinking. So I'm delighted to open this up. We have limited time, so I'm going to ask, as with people on the stage, that responses and interventions are limited to, or questions are limited to 2 minutes. So anything that you're bursting to ask or to share, please do. In any language, in any of the 3 languages that are functioning today. We had Laotian yesterday. Yes, no? We all absolutely agree about the impact of what we're doing. You mentioned was there a hand, or do I come back to the stage and we can carry on? Yes.
It's quite interesting about the title. In English, it's International Arts Leadership, but in Chinese, it's about International Culture Leadership. So perhaps there is some implication. Please link something about that. And also, in Chinese, 藝術帶領我們往哪裏去? Perhaps 我們帶領藝術哪裏去? 會唔會係咁樣思考?
Okay. I think everybody is getting translations if they need, but it's a very provocative question. Are we leading the arts, or the arts leading? We're supposed to be leaders on this stage, right? Where are we leading the arts? Or are we working with the arts to lead us, the community, somewhere? Maybe since I haven't had a chance to speak my mind very much, I'm going to jump in there first, and then you guys get your chance too. I think that what we've been defining, the way that we've been talking about our community, society, including the young generations, is that we feel that the arts could have really important impact on how people live, how people view the world, how people relate to each other, how people have a sense of community, including some of the things that are mentioned, like empathy, like active listening, like pride in their community, like their identity as an individual and as well as in a community. So I think those are the things that I've been hearing today, and I feel very strongly, I agree with this, that the arts could get us there, that we can use the arts, that the arts can help us. I don't like to say we use the arts, because I think the arts are sort of bigger than we are, but the arts can help us to get to a better place as a society, can help us as individuals to get to a place where we would like to see everybody be. Lynn?
Yes, definitely. I would like to see the arts as foundational in schools. It's not just music or visual arts, but you work through the arts to learn about history. You work through the arts to learn about social issues. And the human values come in as well when you have to work as a team. The gentleman asked a very good question. Where do we lead the arts, or where the arts lead us? Personally, at FTech, we believe in taking one further step forward to see if there's any reaction. In other words, to put it very bluntly, we do not really like to be led by the market. I think there has to be a balance to this, that we have to provide people with what they need and want at the moment, but as arts practitioners, we ought to be one step ahead. The story that Dr. CAREY was sharing earlier on about the man 150 years ago who led the arts, maybe you can help us with that as well. So he led the arts in a way.
Yes, that was a reference to it. We had a lovely lunch together, thank you, British Council, Hong Kong. And I was sharing a story. I feel terribly analogue in the face of Dr. Wong's extraordinary vision of change. But I think that's one of the unique things about Edinburgh as a city, is that the history is so compelling that it informs, I suppose, and sometimes gives us roots through our contemporary experience. And I was sharing a story about a real man who lived in Edinburgh 130 years ago, and who in fact is credited with coining the phrase, think global, act local. He was called Sir Patrick Geddes, and I don't think he was particularly liked in his day, because he was a difficult person. He was coming up with challenging, radical ideas of new ways to live, and a very holistic vision of society in which he wanted to build a better life for the community and citizens of Edinburgh, who at that time were living in one of the worst slums in Europe. And he saw art as one of the ways in which to support that. He saw art as the way in which to provide a conversation, to provide a sense of dialogue, to understand and encourage citizens to see their place in a city in relation to the world. And one of the things he said, he's infinitely quotable, and easily quotable because he's dead. He said, but one of the things he said, which I think is very powerful, and I think is something that we are all attempting to do, is he said, I want to give everyone the vision of an artist, because they begin with the art of seeing. And he wanted to share that way of looking that an artist can sometimes bring with a completely broad community. And I think that's what I think everyone, the extraordinary examples and amazing work that's been shared in the panel today, for me the thing that connects this is less leadership and more a passion about sharing, a passion about actually, because in some ways art only becomes art if it enters into that wonderful relationship with an audience. It's the combination of a work with the people who participate and experience and gain something from that that actually really creates what is an amazing art experience.
Rosa? Oh, Rupert.
Look, it's a really interesting topic to extend to. And I don't think there's an easy answer, but maybe a couple of pebbles in the pond. I come from a young country, but a very old continent with a continuous culture of almost 70,000 years of Indigenous culture in Australia. And one of the things that's spoken about in Indigenous culture is the sense of an art culture, that art itself is at the top of the pyramid, and political organisations and economic arrangements and even forms of kinship are in some way derivative from the significance and importance of art in everyday life. And understanding, particularly the cultures of the southern hemisphere and some in the north as well, of the resurgence of indigeneity and Indigenous culture, I think that's a really important trend to sort of think about in the next quarter century, and what an art culture actually means. So it's actually combining those two words into a single phrase. The second comment I'd make is that increasingly at the Australia Council, we are talking about the concept of cultural democracy. Cultural democracy is a concept that goes way beyond just access and equal access. It's really about a sort of validation of a much broader expression of culture within a community, that the singular totemic views that may have existed in the past are far less relevant to what might happen in the future. And the broad sense of cultural democracy and what that might mean around inclusion and the breadth of diversity, I think will become increasingly important considerations as we move forward.
Well, my take on it is really that the difficulty is knowing when the arts leads us and when the arts needs to be led. And there are different spaces, different things, different areas where these two apply. I mean, for the good reasons that both Lynn, I think, and Sorcha have spoken about. Clearly, the arts leads us in terms of creativity, extending possibilities, pushing boundaries, unleashing, visions which are new to many of us if you don't have the artistic lens, and we should really respect that and recognize that the arts leads there. But I think where the arts needs to be led is where I guess if arts councils really are effective, we would have to really explore where the arts needs to be led, because where we are sitting, we do see the gaps, and a vibrant ecosystem is necessary, and there are parts of the ecosystem that may not be functioning so well for whatever reasons. I mean, for instance, I see that in my country. One is that there are many areas in which museums and galleries can synergize, but left individually, they may not do so. So ours is to nudge that partnership and collaboration, to have shared services, shared partnerships. Even in areas like conservation, a lot of value for money could be reaped if you just nudge them all together. So that's clearly one. The other is clearly research and capability. This is the role of councils that have to really help the arts. You have to lead in research, in capability development, because individual arts practitioners, arts groups either have no time for that or no competency to do that. And that's where I think if you could bring resources to where the arts really needs that kind of gap plugging, I think that's where we go a long way.
Yeah, I mean, we're a foundation, so it's hard for us to say whether we lead anything. But I think we are always in a position to facilitate, to support our partners, so that they can go out to lead the field. So I think that's very critical. But to us, I think it's very, very important, which I hear a lot of echoes around here, is that art is really beyond just appreciation. It is an everyday life. It is about compassion. It is about an appeal to emotions. In addition to reasons, probably. So how can we harness that power then to heal people, to strengthen people's confidence, to help families sort of blend together? I think those are the issues that we like to really explore a lot more with our partners.
Can I come back to something else? I agree that all of that, and I hope that addresses to some degree that actually very provocative and interesting question. Is there anything else from the audience? Any other questions? Anything else? Because as I was listening to this, there was something on my mind, which is that we almost assume in our conversations what that we're talking about excellent art, that we're talking about art that will make you feel and think and grow as a human being, all of those wonderful things. Where does that sit? I know that we've talked about the dashboard and the balanced scorecard. I've heard the word excellence. The word excellence was embedded in many of the presentations. Quality was mentioned a number of times. How do we, is this something that we recognize? Is this something that we can talk about? Is this something that we can somehow distill some KPIs on? And tell you from personal experience, the dangers of non-quality. For instance, I used to work in the symphony orchestra. And musicians work very hard, and they really want to play to appreciative audiences. Now and then we would, and this was in the early days of engagement. We do things a little bit better now. At least at the festival we do. But we would bus 600 kids into the concert hall, and give them a concert of classical music that they had never heard before. That's one side of the equation, and that's a hard threshold to cross sometimes. And let's we've said somebody said life is short and art is long, and art does take investing time to the more you invest in, the more you get out of it, right? So you bus these kids into a concert hall, you play them some classical music. That's part of it. The second part of it is that the musicians who are really stimulated and want to play their best when they're playing fascinating works, or when there's a fantastic conductor, or it's an important concert, don't always feel the same way about a kid's audience that may or may not get it, and that they're actually wanting to get out of there. So very often I have felt that we have done more harm than good by having that kind of access. So which brings me back to those key words of excellence and quality. Are there any thoughts about how we can, in this inclusiveness, in democratizing the arts and in bringing people in to share the things that those of us who already are privileged to know it, value and understand the value of, how do we do that? Are there dangers?
Could I have a go? And I certainly feel there's a big difference between the role that I perform as a government agency to the role that I might perform as a member of a philanthropic trust. And I think that when you're dealing with public funds, it's very hard to justify, for example, funding non-excellent work. That's a really interesting sort of challenge in the public domain. In the philanthropic domain, that's actually great. It's often at the heart of what you might want to do in philanthropy land, to give encouragement and support and validation and levels of community engagement to organisations that might not normally be in receipt of public funding because they're at a different stage in their professional development. So I find it quite an easy distinction to make that when it's public money, it's really hard to give justification to something that most of the community might consider actually isn't central to what the role of public funding might be.
I think this is really where arts education come in. We have a program called Smart Youth, and it's for children who are very vulnerable. In addition, before we take them to anything, and we take them to 5 cultural outings a year, before that, in classrooms and workshops, we're starting to work on a particular theme so that when they get into the performance venue, they're not simply gaping, like what I said. Hopefully that they're seeing something. But concomitantly, because we take them to 5 cultural outings, we speak to the presenters, the arts companies as well. So, you know, it could be the Hong Kong Ballet or Hong Kong Sinfonietta. And we actually bring them up to speed on what we're doing. And they will try and bring their artists into the picture as well. So again, it's a matter of managing expectations. But the basic premise has to be, this is about arts education or arts in education. And this is about nurturing the audience of the future. So I think the immediate message has to come out very clearly. Just busing a whole load of kids into a concert hall is disastrous, both sides.
Right. I'm glad you asked that question because something that we think very deeply about. You heard that we've been doing a lot of work bringing arts to the communities and going out to where people live, work, and play. And this sort of work, arts is really quite at an accessible level. It's not really at the very high art, high excellence kind of spectrum. So what we're trying to do now is really to raise the level of play, even in the community arts that we're delivering. And we realize that some arts groups are more suited to that. Some artists have those skill sets. Some are willing to pick up those skill sets, and they are competencies to be developed. It's not everyone that can do community arts well. It is actually a competency to be developed. So we're trying to identify the arts groups who are really excellent in what they're doing and yet have those characteristics or the wish to really work with communities. So we want to give the resources to train them, and we want to also have a sense dialogue with them as to the kind of offerings. So we've got a couple of very good, I'll use the example of dance, for instance, right? We all know that dance and music is a very accessible way of reaching out to people. We've got excellent arts groups who will perform at the Esplanade, but we're having conversations with them as to what we fund them up to do if they go to the community. And so it is a led process. We understand you have to go out there, offer something quite like a curtain raiser, a kind of a teaser, and then lead the audiences to different types of experiences. So that's what we're doing in Singapore.
Yeah, I think it's a great question about, I guess sometimes it's time conflict and resources conflict, right? I mean, if a sort of world-renowned violinist, if you ask him or her to always perform in front of students, which is good perhaps for the students, but maybe he or she does not have enough time to practice so that he or she becomes a really sort of good performer. I think it's a difficult question, but I would take an example in sports. Right? In sports, you also have elite sports. Now, those who goes to Olympic Games might not be the best community ambassadors sometimes. Of course, their fame is helpful, but whether they can actually coach students is a completely different thing. So I think it's a fundamental question of how we build up the whole ecosystem so that everyone can be taken care of. Of course, there will be discussions and potentially debates and conflicts on how you then allocate resources. Do you put resources on this end or more on that end? But I think that, again, it's a healthy discussion and debate in the community and sometimes even within a philanthropic foundation.
I think that quality and excellence definitely exist. They're not always easy, I think, to define, particularly in the arts, but I think that they come from a position of knowledge and from both within a generation but also intergenerational constant exposure and building up of a sense of artists' ways of working. And I think that Leslie has touched on some really important points in her presentation with that wonderful slide of the novice, the excited novice, and the regular novice. And I think what we need to think about is in some ways finding ways in which that knowledge can become part of the process of becoming an audience member. Because if an audience has an initial exposure to something that is compelling enough to make them to want to return, then they too will begin to build their own, a quite personal, I think a knowledge bank that's based on personal experience, and I think that is really critical. I've heard the expression yesterday by, that wonderful presentation from the gentleman who was working for the Chinese National Library, the National Library of China, and he was talking about cultural confidence. And I think that this is where we can bring audiences into that engagement of feeling that they can go in my case, to a gallery, in someone else's case, to a piece of theatre, and see a piece of theatre that others and that critics might view as being of extremely high quality and still come out and say, I did not enjoy that. And to have confidence in expressing a personal response to a piece of work without feeling that because they don't have the knowledge, because they haven't been engaging as an audience member for that long, that they can't express a personal view.
One more opportunity for any interventions or questions from the floor. If not, we're... Oh, sorry. Winsome.
Yes. Thank you for giving me this minute. I just want to add to the discussion about the balance that we have to strike between quality and impact on individuals and communities. It's also the chance that we have to give or maybe create for artists to stretch. And because I think, I mean, take for example, I don't want to advertise, but I'm advertising. In the New Arts Power that we are doing, we asked artists what particular communities, local communities, they want to work with. And we find a social organization to partner with and enable them to immerse in their communities. And in the course of it, the artists would get nourishment from the experience of working with a particular population. And I do think that if we, in a way, ground artists in communities, they would get something back. And at the same time, I think we respect artists that they have to have a dimension to stretch. So we make sure that they have professional display, performances, or exhibitions. And they have also the chance to listen to their own audience. And I think we need to have an ecosystem, not only in cultivating competency, talents, but we also have to let artists who already are experienced to learn through their own journeys and to be even more versatile, a more receptive artist, and to contribute back to our own communities. And the trust and respect to artists are what I want to emphasize in this ecosystem.
Thanks, Winsome. And thanks for bringing the artists back into the consideration, the conversation. We have been talking about working with artists, of course. The focus has been really about the audience, how we grow them, how we encourage them, what support systems are necessary for growing audiences, and how we grow them. If I can just, in 1 minute, summarize, it's impossible to summarize this very diverse and very rich 5 presentations. But the takeaways, and in the spirit of democracy, we will all have different takeaways, but let me just share mine with you. Mine are that we need to continue to articulate the impact of the arts and what they can do. That here, at least in this space, we recognize that the arts can change lives, can change communities, can change how we see ourselves and each other and how we interact with each other, and therefore has a really important role in any society, perhaps particularly in societies that are a little bit fractured. As to the subject, where the arts lead us, I think one of the things we want to do is to lead everybody to the arts as well. And then hopefully the arts can, with all of us, take us to a better place. Can I ask you please to join me in thanking our amazing panelists for this discussion? And I think it's time for a break, yes?